Welcome to the Engineering with Nature podcast. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has been working on the Engineering with Nature initiative since 2010, working and collaborating to advance the use of natural processes and systems to deliver a broad range of economic, environmental, and social benefits. N-EWN develops and implements nature-based solutions for water and infrastructure projects. It brings together a growing international community of practitioners, scientists, engineers, and researchers to harness the power of nature to innovate and solve problems and create sustainable solutions. This podcast tells their stories. Now here's your host, Sarah Thorne of Decision Partners.
In Season 1, Episode 10, we introduced a new and powerful collaboration called the NEWN, the Network for Engineering with Nature. NEWN is a community of researchers, practitioners, and educators who are working together to advance engineering with nature. We're back in Season 5 to talk with the visionary leadership of the Network for Engineering with Nature about what's been accomplished and what's ahead. I'd like to welcome Todd Bridges, Senior Research Scientist, Environmental Science, and National Lead of the Engineering with Nature program at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and Brian Bledsoe, Director of the Institute for Resilient Infrastructure Systems at the University of Georgia. Welcome, Brian.
Happy to be back. There's a lot of progress to share.
Yes, indeed, there is. And happy to join Brian in talking about that progress, and with some of our additional guests, point to the future. We've achieved a great deal, I believe, since the NEWN started in October of 2020. We've got 30 researchers and dozens of projects underway and many new partners to talk about.
We look forward to hearing what's going on. NEWN's focus is on multidisciplinary collaboration to create infrastructure that supports a whole range and variety of value and benefits for communities, the environment, and the economy. Todd, we have two special guests with us. Please introduce Alan Herbert from Ducks Unlimited and Chris Mack from Stantec.
Thanks, Sarah. Happy to do so. It's a real pleasure to have Ducks Unlimited as a partner organization in the Network for Engineering with Nature. And Alan Herbert is with us today and as the Senior Scientist for Sustainability and Nature-Based Solutions with Ducks Unlimited. And it's great to have an engineer with an environmental nonprofit that does a whole variety of work and has been doing that for a very long time. And I'm sure Ellen's going to provide us a lot of good information about the work of the organization and what they're looking to achieve through their participation in the NEWN.
Thank you, Todd, and delighted to be here to talk to you and Brian and Sarah about our partnership with NEWN and Engineering with Nature. As you said, Ducks Unlimited is a very old organization. We started in 1937, and a lot of our work centers around wetland and floodplain engineering. And we are somewhat unique in the nonprofit world in that we do have our very own staff of engineers across North America who have been working on engineering problems and engineering with nature, as you guys call it, for many decades. Today, we operate across 3 countries. We restore and conserve millions of acres, everything from floodplains to rivers to coastal ecosystems, and kind of everything from very low-tech, low-cost interventions all the way to extremely elaborate sort of hybrid natural and gray infrastructure projects. So working with the NEWN and with University of Georgia and the Corps is a really exciting opportunity for us to learn more and then also share the lessons that we've learned.
Just great to have you on the podcast, Ellen. So welcome. And let's welcome Chris. Chris Mack is the Principal Coastal Engineering Lead and Regional Director of Stantec.
Yeah, and this is another dimension of our work across the Network for Engineering with Nature, and that is to bring in academia and government and the nonprofit world, and importantly, the private sector into the network. And Chris is a coastal engineer He has a career foundation within the Corps of Engineers, but now working with Stantec. So great to have you here, Chris.
Well, thanks, Todd. Appreciate it, and glad to join everyone for this call. And it's great that we got here. You know, it's been over a year for us getting involved in this partnership. And, you know, I look back at 30 plus years in my career that started with the Corps of Engineers. And, you know, we've been doing engineering with nature. We just didn't know what to call it back when I started my career. We were doing ecosystem restoration and using natural materials to solve the challenges of the coast, whether it's erosion or wave attack or flooding. But what's exciting today with Network for Engineering with Nature is now we have a common vocabulary. We have common terms, a shared understanding. I think in addition to that, the societal consciousness for engineering with nature is much larger than it was, say, 10, 20 years ago. You know, it's fascinating to me that almost every study we get involved with, every project has some element of resiliency, climate change, and right there with it is engineering with nature. You know, it's like when we're looking at our coastal engineering toolbox, what solutions do you have on the greener side of things and that work with nature so we can get some of those ecological co-benefits. So anyway, wonderful to be here and really appreciate joining fabulous folks like yourself.
It's really great to have you, Chris. It's an important step towards forging these private, academic, government partnerships that we envision to decrease the lag time from, the R&D to the practice. Stantec's been doing ecosystem restoration, as you said, for a long time. I got involved with Stantec on some river restoration probably 20 years ago when I was out in Colorado. You're doing wonderful work with living shorelines and, system level coastal resiliency. And I just really pleased that, an innovative firm like Stantec has joined. You all have demonstrated an openness to share knowledge and information and monitoring data and, provide internship opportunities for our students. So we're really excited about that.
It's great to see the network expanding because when you look at the organizations and their depth of experience and what they bring to the game, if you will, it's very encouraging and inspiring when we think about combining all that together, in the pot, if you will, for engineering with nature and how we can make progress together.
Let's take a couple of minutes and talk about what has been accomplished at the NEWN over the past couple of years. Todd, on our Season 1, Episode 10 podcast, you said, and I'm going to quote you here, "We seek a revolution. We have a revolution ongoing within the Army Corps of Engineers to revolutionize how we deliver civil works, infrastructure, water infrastructure for the United States. To power this revolution, you've got to bring in collaborators, and a particularly powerful collaboration is the combination of academia with government research and engineering enterprise. Working hand in hand with Brian and his colleagues and academia on these same projects, advancing our capability to produce these outcomes." So that was pretty powerful stuff back then, and the NEWN has truly expanded. Give us an update. How goes the revolution?
Well, I think the revolution is going quite well. But we've expanded our communication very significantly, sharing, networking across the Corps of Engineers through our Engineering with Nature practice leads and our Engineering with Nature cadre practitioners all across the country within the Corps. We've grown our Engineering with Nature proving grounds to include 6 districts and 1 division, and the engagement that's happening on the ground, in the water, at those organizations in the Corps and other places across the Corps, I think is just fantastic. And we've expanded our research and development. We're to develop and deliver the technical capabilities our teams need to plan, design, construct, operate, maintain nature-based solutions. And importantly, which is really the heart of our episode today, we're substantially growing our engagement with other organizations, working beyond the castle walls in the Corps of Engineers, beyond the castle walls to bring in the depth of experience that exists in other organizations that work in the nonprofit and the private sector and different forms of government, to bring all of that collective goodness, if you will, together to move the revolution forward, to innovate more in practice.
And innovate indeed. So, Brian, in our season 1 episode, you said that you hoped over the next decade that your partnership through the NEWN would mainstream, that was your word, engineering with nature and natural infrastructure, and bring it to a scale where its potential and highest value can be realized. What's been accomplished from your perspective?
Well, I think we can cite things in, the 3 major areas that we're focused on, the R&D and education and communications. I would say on the R&D side, we've made significant progress in setting up a network of, as Todd mentioned, proving grounds, not just within the Corps, but across the country. We've got academic partners and, all the major biomes across the U.S. from, the Midwest and the arid Southwest. And so we've essentially made some good progress on setting up a long-term network of, test beds. We hosted a National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine workshop on natural infrastructure that was really inspiring. We hosted that here at UGA, and we brought folks in from across all the sectors concerned with natural infrastructure. I would encourage anyone who hasn't checked out the proceedings from that workshop to do so, available on the Academy's website. On the education front, I think there's a lot of synergy among the academic partners and the private sector partners in terms of developing lots of training and upskilling opportunities, everything from, short courses like we have taught at the professional meetings to graduate degrees and certificates and internships. And on the communications, I think, at all levels of government, I hear senators in committee meetings throwing around natural infrastructure like it's, a very familiar and important term to them, and local governments talking about it in the context of the Infrastructure Investment Act. So I guess it sort of culminated a few weeks ago when the White House rolled out their fact sheet, which was really indicative of the momentum that we have now. So
yeah, I think what Brian is capturing, is important. These ingredients we have of prompting change and innovation, and how we pursue solutions for some very significant challenges across the country related to climate change and equity and degraded environments and ecosystems. And one of the ways in which we can accelerate our progress, and this word acceleration is also used in connection to nature-based solutions, as the White House did in its report that Brian just referenced. I think one of the levers that will help us accelerate is to make use of the multi-sector fully. And as we've already referenced here, it's government and academia and the private sector and the nonprofit sector working together. We all bring different capacities and perspectives to bear, and the more we are able to collaborate and partner substantively, I think the more acceleration of progress we will collectively make. Maybe there was a time, a long time ago, where, you just pursued one sector at a time, but that's not the way we're going to be able to deliver solutions like this for the types of problems and opportunities that we have. We got to get out of our narrow lanes, even though they may be rutted. It may take some energy to get out of the rut, and work across organizational boundaries, but there's great capacity to do this, and I think the partnership within the NEWN reflects that.
So let's pick up on that. Significant accomplishments have been made through the network because you brought these multidisciplinary approaches together to create new thinking, powerful synergies on really how best to harmonize nature and nature-based solutions with traditional infrastructure. So let's bring in Ellen and Chris and do a bit of a roundtable on the potential of multisectoral collaboration to really accelerate nature-based solutions. And I'd like to ask each of you to comment on a few questions. So here's the first question. From your perspective, what's the biggest opportunity to leverage the power of multisectoral collaboration? Ellen, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, of course. And I'm gonna borrow a phrase that Chris used that I really loved, which is that this has allowed us to have a common vocabulary. Mm-hmm. And I think, that's a common vocabulary across, federal, state, NGO, multisectoral partnerships, but it's also a common vocabulary that we need to develop amongst disciplines that are working together. So for us, in our long history of wetland habitat restoration, we've always had a very cross-disciplinary interaction between biologists and engineers and ecologists. We call them our bioengineering team. But there's far more disciplines that need to get integrated to really accelerate the use of nature-based solutions. And so that's a very exciting opportunity to start to talk collectively between biologists, engineers, policymakers, economists, to tie a bow on this. And I suppose, my grandest hope for this sort of multisectoral partnership is that we can get to a place with lots of discussion and with plenty of robust sciences that we can really put nature-based features, natural infrastructure on the same level playing field as traditional gray infrastructure, and that will really be our key to accelerating its adoption by developing this common vocabulary and a set of rules and a playing field that allow us to look at all of these opportunities and understand all of them.
Great, thank you. Chris, how about you? What's your perspective?
Yeah, so, as far as multisectoral, the name NEWN is perfect in that regard, Network for Engineering with Nature. It's a network of multiple sources. So when as an engineer, whether I was in the public sector, when I worked for the Corps, we were given challenges in the environment, in the real world to solve, whether it was erosion, whether it was flooding, waves, or multi-hazards. Engineers by training, academic training, are given it's a pretty rigorous program, but it's focused mostly on Newtonian physics and forces. What are you going to design to resist this force? And when you start thinking about nature, it's not the first thing that comes to mind, because what you've historically studied is, brick, steel, hard, rigid structures that can resist a particular force. But with the blending of the network of biologists, ecologists, and hey, did you guys know that we can solve the same challenge you're trying to solve, whether it's shoreline stabilization or ecosystem restoration, using natural solutions? And so we're where things are applied. And so we often look to guidelines. We're not looking to develop a new theory to solve. And that's one thing that benefits us with the network, is we can pull from, say, ERDIC's release of the International Guidelines for Natural and Nature-Based Features, a compendium of what to do. What do I need to think about as a practitioner trying to solve this real-world problem? We can pull from academic resources that Brian and UGA might release into the workforce. We have opportunities for interns to study with us and join us in solving a real-world challenge, and then those become the next generation of engineering with nature visionaries, if you will. But we look for, again, applied solutions, and that's where the network that is tracking applications, monitoring the applications, documenting the lessons learned, pulling in new R&D and sharing that with the network gives us opportunity to try that out. There might be a particular project in the future that we're encountering that has some complexities to it that we just can't figure out with existing information or guidance. And we have an opportunity to throw that to the network and say, hey, look at this situation here. What do you guys think? Or it might be a situation where, we're kind of boxed in due to these particular environmental forces and conditions of building something that's cost X million dollars. And someone with the network might say, you could accomplish the same thing for probably 50% less and probably have a system or a solution that's more resilient to future extreme conditions. So I just think any solutions that we collectively put out there are going to be better off because, again, we're able to tap into this large resource, the network itself.
So it's really two-way. Brian, what's your perspective? How do you see organizations like Ducks Unlimited and Stantec adding value to the network?
Well, there's a whole host of ways, but I'll highlight a couple. A lot of people don't know it, but Ducks Unlimited has a staff of about 60 engineers, plus a lot of biologists and other folks managing a very large portfolio of projects, all the way from, the initial conception and planning and design all the way through, maintenance. And so they're on the ground, and obviously Stantec is very prolific in engaging with clients in this area. And so I think they bring sort of this really important feedback loop where we talk about end-to-end capacity across the network, where we go from the R&D to the application and, co-produce with communities and clients, find ways that natural infrastructure can protect people and communities and livelihoods. They're there on the ground, and by learning by doing, we can take that knowledge and feed it back into the beginning of that loop to inform the research and development and again shorten that lag time. So the other point I think it's worth noting is that a lot of times, especially in Chris's role, he's got to make the value case to his clients. They want to know what are the economics of this. We've got all this infrastructure investment money flowing down, and I think our private sector partners can really help us sharpen and articulate that value case to a wide variety of folks.
Yeah, I think there's a progression here. We've talked about words and having common words. You have to get beyond pronunciation. Sarah says leverage. Todd says leverage. First we need to recognize we're talking about the same thing, whether it's leverage or leverage. And then you can get into the finer substance of the definitions, the depth of these concepts. And different organizations and different disciplines, say those who are trained in, if you will, science compared to those who are trained in engineering, or those trained in maybe the social sciences or law. Those different disciplines bring different perspectives and traditions of thought and values into what they do. And combining these together leads to stronger teams, I think stronger solutions as well. But to draw that strength, to make that strength, you really have to spend a lot of time, quality time, with each other to get at that level, to get beyond just pronouncing the same words in the same way, but actually working together. in that true kind of interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary way that brings in the strengths of different organizations. That's what we're seeking through the network.
And really lets you leverage or leverage the synergies amongst you.
Yes.
Okay, so the next question is, what do you see as the role and the value of the Network for Engineering with Nature in really helping deliver the benefits of natural and nature-based solutions? And Chris, maybe we'll start with you this time.
One that I related to instantly as an engineer was methods and standards. So, oftentimes when we're solving a problem for a client, we have we definitely want to provide value. So we want to have a fair and reasonable cost to that, to providing those services. We're under a schedule, so we need solutions, and we need them fast. We need to evaluate different alternatives. But since engineering with nature is still a fairly new field, I know it's been around for a decade or more, maybe 2 decades or so. But in terms of in coastal engineering, for example, we've always had the Shore Protection Manual, the 1984 Shore Protection Manual. And then in the early 2000s came a major update to that, which today is the Corps' Coastal Engineering Manual. And it's our practitioner's Bible for the practice of coastal engineering. And so when living shorelines became more prevalent and became, hey, appreciate you solving this problem, but can you put some green in it and natural solutions? We look to, there are some academic guidelines out there from some of the universities that have been doing this. There's some state agencies that are putting together some guides. And now today, a lot of the DOT hydraulic design guides are implementing natural and nature-based feature solutions. Federal Highway Administration just came out with a wonderful guide as well. And then certainly the federal government, Corps of Engineers, USGS, most of the federal agencies are addressing it. Is it complete? Probably not. But is it enough to get an engineer, started and going and asking the right questions to solve the problem? And I think the answer is yes. But that's where Brian was talking about the R&D. The R&D is going to fill any current gaps that we have, but introduce new solutions in the future that we maybe aren't thinking about today, especially in the aquatic environment where you have to understand what impacts are to, say, water quality and what types of solution you're proposing, how they're going to affect those organisms. And I was thinking, one example, years ago, I was involved in a beach nourishment project leveraging upland sediment sources. And there was concerns about the color of the sediment. And I said, well, what's the concern? And they're saying, well, you might impact the temperature of the sands. Okay, well, why is that a concern for a design practitioner? Because you might alter the temperature of the sands and the substrate that the sea turtles will place their eggs in, and you might alter the male to female distribution. And so we had one of our biologists put together a in situ study on the beach with using sensors to monitor the changes in temperature and impacts, at a elevation below the beach. But that was a topic that I didn't encounter on every nourishment project, whether it was a Corps of Engineers nourishment project or a private sector nourishment project. It was unique to that particular situation because a state agency representative who was reviewing the project asked the question. The study, I think, added to the science and understanding of sediment and its impact on a species, in this case, sea turtles. So we not only answered and addressed the permitting concerns and conditions, but I think we contributed to the overall literature. There's not a project we do that's not going to affect the natural environment. And Stantec, our tagline is designing with community in mind. So that includes all communities, anthropogenic, but also living organisms and stuff. So.
And that's part of really, to Brian's point, mainstreaming these approaches, mainstreaming how we do these things. Ellen, talk a little bit about the benefits that you see from a Ducks Unlimited perspective and being part of the network for engineering with nature.
Absolutely. So, Chris's example about sand color and temperature and sea turtles is a great one because it's a great illustration. There's a place in time where that would have gone somewhere in Stantec's vaults, and that learning wasn't distributed. I think we were all guilty of being in our own corners with what we learned. Leveraging the network for engineering with nature, it's a great opportunity, a great venue to leverage shared learning, to make sure some of these, what we might have considered relatively esoteric or uninteresting questions to anybody but us with others, and realize it's a shared problem. So just having that venue to build consensus, to share learnings, to take what we might have, put somewhere on a hard drive 15 years ago and make it a product that can be shared and utilized by practitioners, not only in the US, but around the world, seems just incredibly important. And I don't think that you can understate the value of sitting in a room, whether it's in person or virtual, and sharing some of those things. The other is consensus building. So you have a whole slew of different actors now in the network. We've talked a lot about government and NGOs and the private sector, but there's also some cities and local authorities in the mix now, which is really a neat thing to see, because those are the entities that really advocate and end up being the sort of owners of these types of projects. So having this sort of soup to nuts, academic to implementers, all in the same room discussing different perspectives of the same problems is really energizing to me. And then I see sort of the three big opportunities for Ducks Unlimited and other NGOs really being training. So the opportunity to talk about how we educate students, what we teach them, the type of coursework, maybe multidisciplinary coursework, opportunities for internships with folks like Stantec or us or other members of the network that give students that real world experience that help accelerate this practice and frankly just get people comfortable with multidisciplinary concepts. The second one would be the sort of quantitative research, but taking quantitative research from a pilot project to scale. So we're no longer studying one use case. We're leveraging the network of Stantec and Ducks Unlimited and the Corps of Engineers to look synoptically across multiple use cases of a particular engineering with nature practice and really evaluate it more holistically. And to Chris's point, really create usable standards. Because we can't create usable standards off of one pilot project. So that's the other thing that's really exciting and energizing. And then I'll just reinforce Chris's message about that sort of common set of methods, of tools, of standards that streamline this for what is relatively new as a practice. And having that common vocabulary, those common terms, those common tools, I think is really powerful to sort of, so we're not reinventing the wheel every time.
And you're advancing the practice every time. Brian, you had a perspective that you wanted to share on this.
I think on the engineering guidance and methods, Ellen and Chris said it well, but even if the many of the members of the network don't actually write the guidance or methods, they can really help catalyze its adoption, I think. For example, many of us in the network, and it's true for Stantec and Ducks, are members of professional societies like the American Society of Civil Engineers, and we're making progress with ASCE on bringing together the scattered pieces of guidance. We know a lot. There's a lot of knowledge out there, and I think the integration of that and working through our other affiliations like ASCE can be really powerful to mainstream that guidance. The other thing I'll note is, we're talking about benefits. I think, there's a really increasing awareness that it's not a level playing field when it comes to benefit cost analysis with natural infrastructure. And the point is that we're leaving a lot of benefits on the table, so to speak. And I think, across the network, there's a lot of awareness of this. And so anytime folks engage with a project or a decision-making process, they can really raise some important questions and offer up some tools and perspectives on how we can start to capture the full array of benefits that natural infrastructure provides.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll add to this that, change is needed. What passed and was accepted as a solution in the context of engineering and infrastructure in the 19th or 20th century is not going to, meet the need of the 21st century. These solutions and how they're delivered has got to change. And I believe that there's a growing acceptance of that reality, and beyond that, an actual commitment to that reality that change is needed. But to the good points that have already been made, in order to accomplish such change, we have to compress the time and the effort. We have to be able to learn faster and compress the time and effort that's necessary to go from, say, discovering something new, learning a lesson, and then delivering a solution that incorporates that learning or that lesson. And I believe, again, combining the collective experience of a diverse network of committed organizations is the way we accomplish that acceleration and learning and practice.
And you've talked a lot in the past, both of you and Brian, about preparing the next generation. And I want to talk about that because I think it's really important. Brian, when we were preparing for this, you were talking about the significant work that's underway through the Network for Engineering with Nature to train students, to include them on project delivery teams, to get them thinking in this holistic way. Can you talk about what you've been doing and why it's so critical?
Think about it sort of like a braided river. Folks that know me know I'm a river guy, but there are all these interwoven channels. It's not just a pipeline of students and workforce. We're making progress in creating opportunities for both existing practitioners and the next generation, and it takes many forms, everything from short courses to compressed training that might result in a certificate, or as I mentioned, graduate programs, and we're seeing flow in all of those braided river channels now. And I highlight a couple of things. We've been giving a lot of thought to curricula, and we're starting out our first cohort of graduate students this January in a partnership with Ducks Unlimited to engage them in work with their field offices and working on projects with them. So I'm a big believer in full immersion when it comes to natural infrastructure training, but there's no substitute for really rolling up your sleeves, getting involved in a project delivery team, and working across the disciplines, and not just having to think about how water moves around and plants and soils and how they work, which is essential, but also the social dynamics and the planning process and thinking across systems. So we've got new courses that we're offering in 2023, and these internships are going to start. And so if anyone out there is interested in that kind of training, please reach out, and we'll find a river channel that you can cruise down.
Perfect. Sign me up. Chris, you're nodding your head. This is important for you and for Stantec.
It is, because, I can't remember if it was my bachelor's or one of my other degrees, but there was this term called systems thinking, thinking about everything as a system and subsystems. And when I think about nature-based solutions, you're definitely going through different systems. And so when Brian was describing an academic curriculum, I was thinking in my mind, first of all, which student is going to be more adept to picking up natural nature-based interest solutions? Is it someone getting a bachelor's degree? I don't know. Probably more along the lines of a master's student in science or engineering or both. And I started thinking, the traditional coastal engineering curriculum is going to have water wave mechanics. In the past, it was going to have coastal structures, groins, jetties, bulkheads, and those are very deterministic applications. We've got a set of equations that we would calculate to determine the thickness and the size. We look at water levels, wave conditions, and to set the dimensions and height of different structures. But we start talking about nature-based solutions, then now we're using a different material that has an intended behavior when it's put in situ. What types of plant species am I going to install along a shoreline that I want to stabilize with nature-based features? And I think that's where the academic programs, and Brian mentioned getting the students out in the field. And most of the students I've seen involved in learning about living shorelines, for example, you see them in a environmental newsletter in the mud, in the muck, surrounded by fellow stakeholders in the environment, if you will, and they're planting sea oats if it's the dunes, or they're planting spartina if it's the marsh. They're getting muddy, they're getting their fingers dirty, and then if they're a student, they're most likely coming back a month later, 3 months later, to monitor the success and progress of some living shoreline installation that they put in. And then the other element of this too that I think academia really helps fulfill is, almost every academic course I've had is data driven. So what type of data and information do I need to collect about this nature-based solution in the field? And what is the data revealing and saying to me about how effective that solution is? And what things could we do differently in the future to enhance it, promote it, or create a better solution? I think that's where the academic programs are really going to help grow the next practitioners for this.
Ellen, I'm sure that the next generations, our students today, are a big issue for Ducks Unlimited as well. What's your advice for students today?
This field is just blossoming. There's so much federal investment. There's so much creativity in the space. So it's a great time to be thinking about this field. And, we know from our own experience that we tend to recruit a lot of engineers who are value driven. They're interested in habitat. They're interested in waterfowl. As we see new generations come on, they're interested in things like biodiversity, the equality and inclusion in natural and green spaces, climate adaptation and mitigation. So thinking about as a student, how your values might drive your career, I think is incredibly important and a great time to be thinking about that. What Chris said is very valuable. We're looking for students who can manipulate data, look at data, that have very strong core skills, whether this be numerical skills, geospatial skills, the very basics of engineering, like using CAD programs. But the advice I would give to students is that you don't have to learn everything. You pick the thing that you're most interested in, that aligns with your values, that aligns with, with what you're good at, and you learn it very well. And the other thing that you learn is how to ask questions and how to build collaborations, because you can't be an expert in everything. And so I think one of the really neat parts of the program that is being built within NEWN and that Brian is building within his program, I was very fortunate to get to sit down with Brian and some of the faculty at the University of Georgia as they were talking about building this coursework. And one of the things they're thinking really critically about is, how you give students a touchstone on all of these different aspects. They won't become an expert in environmental policy or in environmental economics, but they'll have the vernacular and they'll have at least one or two people that they can ask to build collaborations with. And so I'd emphasize that when you move into very interdisciplinary fields, it's easy to get lost and be, a mile wide and an inch deep. But for students to really keep the focus on what they're good at and how you build collaborations to achieve the things that aren't in your wheelhouse. And so I think just very simply building in, that network, that all-important word, network, that you can go throughout your career and build up that skill set through collaboration, not trying to be all things to all people.
If I can add to this, that the future depends on future practitioners. And another way of describing future practitioners are today's students. So investing in today's students is investing in the future. And I also like to think about students this way. Students are like chocolate. They make almost everything better. And they bring an energy, and I see this all the time when I have an opportunity to engage with students, and I have another opportunity later this week to do so at the University of Florida. But they bring energy and new ideas and new perspectives and ways of thinking about problems and solutions. And when they're introduced into teams that are actually working on, if you will, real projects, at scale projects, that introduction of students helps the team. They're a resource for the team. When we give them students opportunities and experience and responsibility, everyone benefits from that. The students, the project teams, and the future.
Before we wrap up, maybe, Brian, you could tell us what's up with NEWN. What's the strategy going forward?
We need to keep building partnerships and relationships and, resist siloing of natural infrastructure. So I think having lots of conversations and moving from, these commitments that we're forging into intentional and organized action that, creates the rapid learning that Todd was talking about. And I think a big part of this is just continuing to tell the story through all our partners. I'm convinced that people are, they change and they innovate and they become convinced of something, when they're moved. Much more than when we just, inform them. So we've got to tell the story of natural infrastructure in a way that moves people, and I think we can do that.
This has been a great discussion, and I think the discussion illustrates the point that we've been making, that combining organizations with different roles and different perspectives and different capacities is going to enrich the enterprise that we're engaged in now and advancing nature-based solutions, and it's going to accelerate our progress. Accelerate it. So come join the revolution.
And we're delighted that Ducks Unlimited and Stantec are part of the revolution.
Indeed.
Indeed. Well, thank you, Brian and Ellen. Thank you, Chris, for the work that you're doing. And thank you for being part of NEWN and for being part of the revolution. Clearly, you're bringing engineering with nature practices into the mainstream and sharing what you've been doing, what you're learning, and inspiring the next generation. So thank you very much. And to all of you, thank you so much for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and we hope that you'll join us again when we talk about engineering with nature.
The EWN podcast was developed by Sarah Thorne and Jeff King, Deputy National Lead, Engineering with Nature Initiative, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. For more information, you can visit our website, engineeringwithnature.org. The EWN podcast is produced by iContact Productions for the Engineering with Nature program within the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I'm Dave Trafford.